Hello and welcome to this episode of The Elephant, and we're joined by a very special guest, Dr. Kizza Besigye. A lot of Kenyans admire really the work that you've been doing, but I'll just say something about you to those maybe from other places that don't know much about you. So Warren Kizza Besigye is a Ugandan physician, politician, and former military officer in the Uganda People's Defense Force. He served as the president of the Forum for Democratic Change and was a candidate in Uganda's 2001, 2006, 2011, and 2016 presidential election, losing to the incumbent Yoweri Museveni. The results of the 2006 election were contested in court, where the court found massive rigging and disenfranchisement. Not a lot of Kenyans know it, but he also was in exile in Kenya in 1981 and 1982, where he worked at Aga Khan Hospital and Kenyatta National Hospital. His wife, Winnie Byanyima, is also an activist, and she currently resides in Kenya, where she heads the Oxfam's regional office. Karibu sana, Dr. Besigye.
My pleasure. It's always nice to be in Nairobi.
So we'll just head right into it. I know a lot of people just know you because of your political work. I guess it's one of the reasons that you've stood out really in the region. And when you talk about the politics, some people see the political setup in Uganda right now, especially what's been happening politically, as a feud between you and the current president, Yoweri Museveni. What would you say in response to that?
I think wrong and oblivious of what Uganda's political history and current situation is, because in Uganda, it's now 55, it's coming to 56 years since independence. No leader has ever handed over power peacefully to another. There have been struggles for change of leadership. Violence has mediated those struggles. And Mr. Museveni came to power through a struggle, an armed struggle, in which I was a participant. And that struggle was aiming at ending this vicious cycle of violence, which we believed, and as we do now, that it's caused by monopolizing power by a narrow section of people, marginalizing the greatest majority of Ugandans and excluding them economically, politically, socially. And that kind of injustice then resulting into protests that become violent, that then cause problems for everybody. Now, Mr. Museveni, in his swearing-in speech in 1986, when he took power, in my presence as one of the active supporters, said that the problem of Africa are leaders who overstay in office. Surely, anybody who is out there listening or viewing this program today cannot tell me that more than 32 years that he has been in office is not greatly overstaying in office, and therefore that there is a problem. The problem cannot be that there is a feud between Besigye and Museveni. It means that there is a political problem. And indeed, that political problem now can no longer be masked, because it has degenerated into a lot of conflict. I'm sure you know that there was a war in Uganda which lasted more than 20 years. Surely it could not have been the Besigye-Museveni feud. We have had, a lot of insecurity in different parts of Uganda. Just last year, there was massacre of hundreds of people in Western Uganda in the area called Kasese. that is still being investigated internationally. You know, that massacre, and the leader of that area is still incarcerated. Their king. That massacre could not have been occasioned by Besigye Museveni feud. We have a situation in Uganda today where youth unemployment is more than 80%. And all these youth who are on the streets of Uganda now translate into situations of insecurity. These are not situations that you can attribute to a Besigye Museveni feud. So clearly the problem of Uganda is a political problem, and my engagement in it right from the word go has been as a result of seeking to influence the direction of how that problem is resolved. I did not set out to be a politician, I set out to be a medical doctor. I was arrested, tortured, nearly killed, simply because I supported Mr. Museveni in the 1980 elections. So yes, there is a lot of propaganda that sometimes tries to divert or distort the contradiction that we have in the country.
And you contested 4 times before for the presidency, and each time, as you said, or rather, you actually referenced the exile, the time when you were in the bush. But when you contested, you suffered violence, and there was a lot of injustice. Really, like there were charges brought up about against you, and you were not allowed to address the public. Issues really of electoral injustice, something that's been in the focus, not just in Uganda, but has been happening in Kenya. We see it very much happening in Zimbabwe and many other African countries. And so how far has the pursuit of solving this problem of electoral injustice gone in Uganda? Like, what are you doing about it? And what?
Well, it's an ongoing and intense struggle.
Okay.
And you rightly say it's not limited. Electoral injustice is not limited to Uganda. The problems that face Uganda are not limited to Uganda. The problems which translate into electoral injustice. And the underlying problem is really domination of these countries by small cliques using forces of coercion, using arms to dominate society. So we have communities in these countries that are totally powerless. Power is controlled by a small group of people. So we have captive countries. So in fact, in my engagement here during the launch of John Onyando's book, who has written about electoral injustice in Kenya, I pointed out that in our countries, really there are only 2 sides in the struggle that is going on. Sometimes the manifestation of political parties as we see them causes distortion and confusion, as if we have a multi-party dispensation, as if there is some kind of a functioning democracy, and that there is contestation of ideas on how best to manage the governments. But that's not the case. The real fact of the matter, at least talking for Uganda, I sometimes don't want to arrogate myself I think risky area of talking on behalf of other countries. But in Uganda, I can say without any fear of contradiction that we do not have a multi-party dispensation. We don't have a democratic system that is underway. What we have is a state capture by a few people using arms who control everything. So all state institutions are controlled, and all state resources are controlled by this group of people. Yeah. So in a way, it's really a military regime, just thinly disguised And in fact, in our case, that even those disguises, I think, are falling apart, because you realize that any problem that surfaces in Uganda, they bring in a military officer to deal with it. We have, of course, challenges of unemployment, as I have said, and the economy not functioning well. Museveni appointed his brother, General Saleh, as in charge of wealth creation. There was a challenge of registering citizens. He appointed a colonel to
Can you
deal
allow
with
me
that.
to take you back to electoral justice? Because you've suffered through it. You've seen what happens. You've seen how it can end up that voting is just a waste of time. So is civil society doing anything about it? Is your party engaging? Are there any initiatives going on to try to sort that out? Because we need to learn from each other.
Yes, there
is,
as I said, there is an intense struggle underway, and a struggle from very different fronts and actors, but all of them focused on empowerment of citizens, having active, empowered citizens that then can influence what happens in the country, can influence who leads the country, can influence how the country is led, can influence how the resources are prioritized in the country. Now, in this struggle, therefore, you have political actors who are now functioning in the existing political parties, although, as I have pointed out, the task under hand is not a partisan one. It's a struggle for re-empowerment of citizens. But since those spaces within political parties have been allowed within the law, they offer an opportunity to organize. And so some people are organizing within political parties. Other people are organizing within civil society arrangements. Some are organizing through cultural institutions. Some are organizing through any form of opportunity that allows people to organize, but organize focused on challenging the monopoly of power by a few people and the use of coercive instruments to do so.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's talk about, like you talked about the economy and how things are not right. And one of the things that's been happening in relation to that has been the issue of debt, whereby at some point the government said that it was able to finance up to about 67% of the budget. But then later it turned out that actually it was up to only about 40 something percent. And so in relation to these questions about the sustainability of this have been coming out in terms of how sustainable will it be to just keep on taking loans, especially in many African countries. Debt has been related to misuse really by the regimes, misuse of national money. And then also, what are the implications of this on Uganda's sovereignty, looking at situations where national resources have been taken up by, for example, by China, like we've seen happen in Zambia and in Sri Lanka?
Well, first of all, I must say that our financial institutions and the government systems are not transparent. And in this situation, it's very difficult to know accurately the level of debt that our country actually is grappling with now. And that's why there have been indeed differences in the kinds of figures that are quoted.
Yeah.
But having said that, I think there are two aspects to the debt question. The first one is the effect of a high level of debt. And we are talking about both external and domestic debt. The effect of that on growth. And it has been crippling, especially the level of domestic debt has been quite crippling because the government, being the biggest borrower in the economy, crowds out the citizens from getting debt, from getting credit themselves that they can use to produce.
Yeah, to uplift their lives.
And to produce for the country, which production then becomes taxable and increases on the services that are available in the country. So production has been affected by the lack of debt to the private sector, by the high cost of credit occasioned by the level of borrowing by government. So it has had a very pernicious effect in that regard. But secondly is the question of where that money goes. Whether the money that is borrowed is used prudently for purposes that benefit people.
Yeah.
And sadly, a great chunk of that borrowed money is not used for those purposes. Part of it is outrightly stolen through the corruption, the systemic corruption that is, runaway in our country. But secondly, what is not stolen outrightly is applied for purposes that do not benefit people. And mainly it is applied to entrench the hold on power by those who are in government, by strengthening their powers of coercion indeed, buying fearful vehicles, fighting vehicles that are deployed to scare people, instead of buying ambulances, buying tear gas that is liberally, used to disperse people and to terrorize people. Instead of buying medicines in the hospital, so there is no medicine, but there is a lot of tear gas. There are no ambulances, but there are a lot of vehicles roaming all over the place, terrorizing. We have a huge patronage system that consumes money that does not add any value to the welfare of our people. People who are simply employed again for purposes of securing the system. So, for example, we now have more than 450 members of parliament for our small population of 38 million, and 38 very poor people. We still are a country classified as highly indebted poor country, HIPIC, that spends so much on these few people that are crowding in the parliament. They have no seats. In fact, now they are trying to build a new parliamentary house because they have nowhere to sit. But each one, we have to buy them a vehicle, and we buy them strong four-wheel vehicles because their roads are bad. So instead of repairing the roads, they buy big vehicles that can go through bad roads. So it's the question of the use of the resources. So we borrow, the priorities for which those resources are applied. So we borrow not to make our ability to pay back greater. We borrow actually to make our ability to pay back much less, because we undermine production, because we do not add value by way of providing either infrastructure or services that then make it possible for people to produce more.
So it's not investing.
So the debt we have is not only growing very fast and becoming unsustainable, but it's injurious to the quality of our economy and quality of the lives of our people.
So let's look at regional integration, and so there's been a lot of movement economically in terms of regional integration, and then also socially. Right now, East Africans all see themselves as one, really, and Africans. There's a very strong sense of oneness. But what are the possibilities of political cooperation? And do you see this as as a solution to some of the political problems we are facing?
Well, I think two things. One is that even previous failure was not out of the realization that there was a need. Because don't forget, we had an East African cooperation which had actually gone a long way to integrating the peoples of East Africa.
Yes.
We had an East African currency. We had the same money in East Africa. We had East African institutions, East African Post and Telecommunication, East African harbors, East African Airways, East African this, East African University. We had East African institutions, and so East Africa was integrated actually at some stage, far more than it is today, and I don't know even how long it will take us to get there. The reason that broke down was the mismanagement of the politics. So, mismanaging of the politics within our nation states cannot engender greater integration, greater cooperation, and eventually, have a federation of peoples.
So that's an interesting
point. So there are two things. One is the politics is about two things. First, you find that the peoples, the integration of peoples has not been focused on. A lot of the time, there is integration of the leaderships and interaction of the leaderships, not that which integrates people, that they have free movement and that they can work wherever and that they can trade freely and
live wherever.
There is no focus on the integration of people and promoting the interests of that integration. We've been looking at the interests of those who are in leadership. Again, as I have said, once we do not have the same approach to ending the vicious cycle of insecurity, instability that arises out of political injustice.
Yeah.
It is political injustice that translates into economic injustice, into electoral injustice, into social injustice, into cultural injustice, and so on. So as long as we don't, focus on dealing with that. And you can now see, we even have different systems in East Africa, although they are talking about federation, integration. In Uganda, we have no term limits. That's why which were abolished while the other members of East Africa were looking. So Mr. Museveni can rule for life. Recently, he attacked and destroyed the remaining leg of the constitution by removing age limit. So now in Uganda, there is a constitutional highway to life presidency, which is not in the other areas. So I think there is absolutely no focus in what will lead to the integration of our people. Not so much of the regimes, integration of regimes, but integration of our people.
So then to you, is regional integration, is it a solution in any way? Or
Absolutely. Regional integration, I think, is a strategic necessity for our people. Because what are we integrating? We are integrating a population that then has greater market value. If we are competing with the European Union, if we are competing with the United States, if we are competing with other developed economies, then we have a bigger market, we have a bigger resource base, we have bigger competencies amongst our people and so on. So it's not only strategically important, it is long overdue. It should have happened a long time ago, and indeed, the independence leaders had recognized that appropriately and worked on it.
right now, is that a possibility? Like if you can just look into the
You see, now the problem is that of leadership, but also of our people. Our people must know that it will not depend on the leader. So we must have a bottom-up struggle. The pressure must come from our people. And it will take the awareness, increasing awareness amongst our people that this is what we need to achieve. And we work to make sure, first of all, within these nation states, that there is progressive leadership, accountable leadership. And once that happens, that then there is the necessary steps towards integration are pursued so that we have the bigger society that we desire. It must start from below.
Yes.
It will not start at the top.
Yeah, I like what you're saying about that. So maybe in conclusion, what is it that you would like to have Kenyans just keep in mind as we talk about all the things that are happening towards becoming a more just nation, more progressive? So what is it that you would say now from your views, from you observing Kenya from outside? What is it that we as a people need to do to really push forward in terms of just getting to where we need to be?
Well, again, I'm extremely hesitant to prescribe what people in Kenya or other areas need to do. It has its own problems. But I can say this, that at least taking Uganda as a case in point and considering the similarities of the Ugandan situation with that of the region, I think whatever leadership that we have within our countries that is well-intentioned must focus on empowering citizens so that we can increase the demand for accountability, demand for the right things to happen in these countries.
Yes.
That takes really intensified awakening of our people to the urgent need for them to be active participants, not lamenters. Because people are, we are poor, we are this, that everybody knows we are poor, everybody knows all these things. The question is, what is it you are prepared to do to get that to change? And to get our people equipped with the understanding that they have what it takes to actually change the systems within our countries, to get people who are leaders to become servants again. Yes. Our leaders are now masters. We are their servants. And that must change so that leaders must do what people want, and if they don't, they are out, and that we have the competencies to achieve that. So that's where we must focus our energy. And once we have active, empowered citizens, then they will change the systems of governance. Yes. We will have more accountable governments. We will have institutions, national institutions that respond to people's needs. We will have regional institutions that respond to people's needs. Yes. And I'm optimistic, I must say, I must end this on a very optimistic note, that though, it's not yet very visible, I think there have been a lot of changes in the right direction. Some of them caused by deliberate actions of many of our people who are out there trying to get our people to understand and to do the right thing, but also meditated on the people through the hardships they have now to endure. Because the marginalization has reached a level where survival of most of our people is no longer, assured. And so, once you push people to the wall, they turn around and fight for their survival. And I think we are at that stage. People are now turning around and saying, wait a moment, this can no longer go on. So all they need now is just to be given some competencies to make things happen in the body. So I'm quite optimistic that we are going to see more and faster changes within our region.
Okay.
That will be leading towards, inclusion of citizens in what goes on in the country, more competencies in production in these countries, so that these countries are some of the greatly endowed countries in the world. There is absolutely no reason why countries which are the most rich in the world inhabited by people who are the poorest.
And have low standards of dignity.
Absolutely. So I'm sure that will end soon and our people will be prosperous again. In fact, in Uganda, I always tell them, soon we shall walk with a swagger.
I like that, and that's really a wonderful way to really come to this close. And I like how you've drawn a vision of really what needs to be, and just telling people, telling Kenyans, telling East Africans, telling our viewers that we all need to be active citizens. And I think you're a very good role model of what an active citizen is, someone who just really gets out and makes your contribution in no matter whatever big way or small way. So we are very honored. Thank you so much once more to have joined us.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kenya,
for tuning in this time, and we hope to see you again. Thank you very much.